Hello, everybody. Our third session will be beginning shortly. If you will join us in the conference center, begin in about 4 minutes.
Here's a joke I heard last week.
Oh, now you're alive, Mike.
Oh, good. I'm on? Okay. Okay, because we have a few minutes and you guys are punctual, we're going to reward you with some really hysterical jokes. You ready? Okay. So there is a Christian missionary now. Everybody gets all nervous. It's going to be an inappropriate joke. It's not an inappropriate joke. Don't worry. Okay, there's a Christian missionary, and he's in the savannah of Africa looking for people to convert. And all of a sudden, he feels this tension in his spine. And he looks behind him. It's his worst nightmare. There's a lion stalking him. And so he starts walking, the lion starts walking. He starts jogging, the lion starts jogging. He starts sprinting, the lion starts sprinting, and the lion's closing in on him. He knows there's nothing he can do. So he does the only thing he can do. He drops to his knees, and he prays to the heavens, and he says, Lord, please make this a Christian lion. And all of a sudden, the lion drops to his knees, crosses his paws, and he says, I thank thee, Heavenly Father, for this meal thou hast prepared before me. There you go. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that you were videotaping that. I was thinking, this is a thing that gets me canceled, like that one joke. Great.
Oh.
I'm so happy. Let's hear it. You stand up. You don't have a mic, so you got to stand up.
I'll project.
Okay.
Buddha walks into a bar.
It's all religion all the time.
Nice. I got one that's similar to that. A skeleton walks into a bar and says, I'll have one beer and one mop. Yeah, you have to think about it. Yeah, think about it. I'll give you one more. So this guy goes into a bar with his dog, and the bartender says, hey man, we don't allow dogs in here. And he says, no, he's actually a talking dog. Get out of here. He says, seriously, I have a talking dog. He goes, if your dog can talk, buddy, both of you get free drinks. He's like, okay. He goes, Rover, what is the, excuse me. He goes, Rover, who is the best baseball player of all time? And he goes, Ruth. And he says, see, he said Babe Ruth. He said Babe Ruth. And the guy goes, get out of here. He goes, give me one more chance. Okay, Rover, what's the structure on the top of this building called? He goes, roof. He goes, see, he said roof. He said roof. And the guy goes, get the hell out of here. So he goes out, and the dog looks up at him and says, you think he thinks it was DiMaggio? Is that enough filibustering to get us?
You've done excellent. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's more, sadly.
In case you were all thinking the next agricultural and food technology breakthroughs was in fact a stand-up show, then sorry to disappoint you. Why don't we get started here? So we are into session 3 now, as I said. The next agricultural and food technology breakthroughs seminar. Please welcome already on stage, Brandon Chen, Chief Technology Officer at Finless Foods. Kara Liang, Executive Director at UC Davis Cultivated Meats Consortium. Paul Shapiro, CEO at The Better Meat Company and our filler performance. Thank you. And Tom Chi, founding partner at One Ventures. And lastly, our moderator, Nick Ozonov, CTO and co-founder at Geltor and co-chair of the Biocom California Food and Ag Tech Committee. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you all. So today, we embark on an important discussion at a time when our planet is at crossroads. With a global population approaching 9.7 billion by 2050, we have an ever-increasing demand on protein demand while we have dwindling natural resources. So the question of how do we sustainably feed our world has never been more pressing. This brings us to the exciting realm of what we kind of call cellular agriculture, which encompasses many of the companies here, including my own company, which is a frontier science where the future of food is truly being reimagined. In this new field, you can produce food directly from cells, whether that's growing animal cells for meat without the meat animal, which is what Brendan's company Finlis does, and Kara's cultivated meat consortium focuses on, to engineering microbes to create essential proteins. This is what Geltor focuses on. To also growing fungal cells known as fungal mycelium to make meat replacements that have the texture and nutritional kind of profile that's needed, which is what Paul's Better Meat company does. And on top of all that, we need to discuss funding, which is what Tom is here to really help enable. So the panel's not here just to discuss possibilities. It's about real actionable innovations. And our focus centers on technological innovations that can transform the food systems, both through public and private partnerships, and the financing strategies that are critical for scaling these innovations. So each question today is designed to unravel the practicalities of these advancements and how our panelists here actually are tackling each one of these challenges. So we can kick off and actually dive directly into the questions here. So first, I'd like to kick off with Brendan and moving down the panel here. Could you introduce your organization and outline the core global and agricultural challenges that it is addressing and how your unique skill sets and experiences empower you to tackle these challenges effectively?
Great. Thank you, Nick. Brendan Chen. I'm Chief Technology Officer of Finlis Foods. So we are a cellular agriculture company. We produce sustainable seafood by cultivating cells of marine species from the ocean to produce sustainable seafood. So the goal of the company is actually to create seafood without, for example, mercury or plastic. So with that in mind, our flagship product is Pacific bluefin tuna sashimi. So basically, we isolate cell from bluefin tuna and cultivate in the clean and controlled environment. And with just pure bluefin tuna cells, as well as full ingredient, will produce sustainable seafood. And the reason for that is we understand the ocean is important to the global environment. And just raise your hand if you live by the area or in the country that is surrounded by the ocean. Please raise your hand. Yes, almost everybody, thank you. And we understand ocean is so important part of the entire ecosystem. And to preserve ocean sustainability is the company's mission. So with that, we combine the technology of biotech and the food science, try to create the next generation of the food to address some of the issue that is actually attacking the sustainability of the ocean. And one of the most pressing issue is seafood demand has been rising over the decades due to the global population increases. And with that, many marine species are under threatened. They may go extinct in the next couple of decades. So with that in mind, the company was founded in 2017 and with a mission to basically address ocean sustainability issue. So currently, we are going through regulatory approval process. And in parallel, we try to raise Series C funding to scale up our production. What we primarily are focusing funding coming from strategic corporate partners, impact investors, family offices who are aligned with our mission to preserve ocean sustainability. And for myself, I'm a technologist, I'm a biologist. I've been in biotech industry over 20 years, working on drug discovery, precision fermentation, and cellular agriculture. Today is very happy to be all of you here.
Thank you. Kara, could you tell us about your work at the UC Davis?
Certainly. Hi, everyone. My name is Kara Leong. I'm the Executive Director of the UC Davis Cultivated Meat Consortium. We are the largest academic body in cultivated meat research in the world. We were the first consortium of researchers to receive both state and federal funding. And we've only been in existence since about 2019. So that tells you how this is a relatively new industry, but it's also growing rapidly. We started out with just a handful of researchers, and now we have about 55 researchers covering 6 different colleges and probably 11 different departments across the University of California, Davis. So a little bit about University of California, Davis. For those who aren't familiar, it is the #1 or #2, depending on the year, agricultural school in the world. It's one of 10 UC campuses, so UCLA, UCSF, UC Davis. We are the largest physical campus because we are an agricultural school. We have, top researchers in plant biology and seed breeding. We have the #1 vet school in the country. We have the #6 school of medicine, the #1 animal science department, and the only food science department in the UC system. So the Cultivated Meat Consortium is located in the Robert Mondavi Institute for Wine and Food Science. So that also has our food science department and our viticulture and enology department. And we do welcome everybody to come visit us if they're interested. I'm very used to leading tours. A little bit about my background. I'm a 3-time UC Davis alum. My background's in plant biology and molecular genetics. And I also have a master's in wine fermentation. And if you learn more about cellular ag, it works a lot with fermentation science. So that's how we got involved. Our national science funding, which was the first national funding for cell-based meat research, focuses on the major hurdles to commercialization for cell-based meat. That works on cell lines, so cell lines that perform the way you want them to perform when you need them to perform, and then media optimization, which is going to be one of the biggest economic hurdles, and that's producing and optimizing media for meat consumption. And then also scaffolding, so the physical structure. So if you want to build something like a structured steak, we're looking at different scaffolding opportunities, bioprocessing and scale up. So not just being able to do it at the bench, but being able to scale it up to large scale for mass production. And then we also look at the life cycle assessment and techno-economic modeling. So those are the economic bottlenecks to the commercialization process, as well as the sustainability of these products. So dealing with the waste streams, dealing with the CO2 emissions, and dealing with all the upstream and downstream processing. So we were also one of 14 institutions that was invited to put a proposal out to develop a center for excellence in all alternative proteins. So that will expand us beyond cell-based. That will include plant-based, fungal fermentation as well, both biomass, which is what Paul's company does, and precision fermentation, which is what Nick's company does, as well as cell-based, and then all the hybrid products that could be built in between, either working with traditional products or working with different side streams of bioprocessing for traditional agriculture. So that is one of the things that we are hoping to build out. My tagline recently has been going from bench to scale. So building that, helping build out that network of facilities that we can do research at the university and expand that to commercialization to facilities that are being built in the local region. We have really strong partners that are actually here in the audience. If you guys want to say hi to some of our regional partners. And my particular work is building out industry relations and strategic partnerships, both public speaking and a lot of outreach events, as well as I'm herding 55 cats. So, so if you'd ever like to tour the Robert Mondavi Institute at UC Davis, I love showcasing our facilities, which are a really great example of what industry can do. We have the first LEED Platinum winery in the world at UC Davis. It is the most advanced winery in the world, which shows fermentation processes. And I'm always happy to bring people to the facility to see what these facilities could be built and showcase all that technology. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Paul, why don't you tell us about yourself a little bit more. We've met cross paths many times over the last almost decade, and what you're doing at the Better Meat Co.
I think the last time that we crossed paths was in an airport, and now we are crossing on a boat. And so I don't know where else there will be for us to cross. I guess a train.
Land and sea.
Does anybody else hear these like bangs? It's like
SpaceX, we gotta go.
Yeah, that's cool.
Or trains.
Yeah.
Anybody else hear these bangs on the boat that we keep on hearing? It's like they're like orcas trying to flip this thing. Okay, Nick mentioned that there's going to be nearly 10 billion of us, or as he very precisely put it, 9.7 billion of us by 2050. And there's already well over 8 billion of us. And the planet just isn't getting any bigger, despite what SpaceX is doing. We're not going to be farming Mars. We're not going to be farming the moon. We have one celestial body to farm. That's right here on Earth. And we've already deforested most of it. And the number one reason that we deforest the planet is to raise animals for food. The number one. More than palm oil, more than, all these other things, even paper products and so on, all that combined is less than just raising animals for food, clearing the forests for cattle pasture and animal feed crop production. And so while the planet is not getting any bigger, our footprint on the planet is getting a lot bigger. And a primary way that we leave that food print is through our footprint, principally in the amount of meat that we eat. Of course, everybody on this boat already knows it would be way better if we ate more bean and rice burritos and lentil soup and hummus wraps. If people wanted to eat more plant-based, that would be wonderful. But people really want meat. In fact, meat demand is going up, not down. It's kind of like saying, well, it would be awesome if people walked and biked more. So, what do we need electric cars for? Well, people really like to drive. So we need cars that don't rely on fossil fuels. And we need meat to satiate humanity's meat tooth that doesn't rely on animals. There are a few ways you can do that have been referenced. One is to grow actual animal cells, like Kara was talking about, called cultivated meat. That's really awesome. I wrote a book on the topic. It's called Clean Meat, How Growing Meat Without Animals Will Revolutionize Dinner and the World. I'm proud to say that because of Nick, it is the first and still only book to have ever been bound in lab-grown leather that Nick grew. Real lab-grown leather. First book that came off the press was that, and we sold it for more than $10,000. We sold it actually for 13.
For charity.
Yeah. No, we split. Nick and I split it. No, we sold it for $13,000. 100% of the proceeds of that one book sale went to the Good Food Institute, which is a charity that advances this space. Given the funding climate in this space now, I kind of wish I would have kept it. But anyway, that's one method, but it's, none of the companies that are growing cultivated animal cells are anywhere near making a dent in this problem. They're doing great things. They're making real progress. You see FDA approvals for some of them now. You see some limited sales in Singapore, San Francisco, Washington, DC, but these are purely symbolic. Even if you think about plant-based meat today, that's in every Walmart, it's in every Burger King, and it still is less than 1% of total meat volume. Like if you look at the volume of meat sold, plant-based meat today is still less than 1%. And so cultivated meat is 0.0001%. And it's going to be a long time before that changes. In fact, Upside Foods, which is the most heavily funded of all the startups in this space, their COO said in an interview recently that they don't plan to have any product on supermarket shelves until the year 2030. So 6 years from now, they aspire to have product on supermarket shelves, the best funded of these companies. I believe in cultivated meat. I think it's very promising. I think it deserves funding, but it's kind of like fusion nuclear. It's a technology for tomorrow, and we need to invest in it heavily today to get there so that it can actually make a dent in the problem, because people really do want so-called real meat, but it's not going to be on supermarket shelves in any meaningful way anytime soon. So then there's plant-based meat, which is already, as I said, ubiquitous in our society. It's in fast food restaurants, it's on big box grocery store shelves. And despite the fact that it has suffered a little bit lately and gets a lot of negative media attention, these companies like Beyond and Impossible are selling hundreds of millions of dollars of product. Eat Just is selling tens of millions of dollars of the Just Egg Scramble. So, they're real businesses that are doing this. Corn, Q-U-O-R-N, in the mycoprotein space now, that's the third arm. You have animal cells, plant-based, then you have fungi. And there's one company that dominates 99% of that field. It's called Corn, Q-U-O-R-N, which is a legacy brand in the UK. They have several $100 million in revenue annually. It's a very good company, but it's only one company, and it's not very popular in the United States. And while it is dominant in Europe, there's a lot more that can be done with fungi, a lot more. Just in the same way that different animals create different textures. Think about
pigs, chickens, cows, turkeys, they all make different types of meat for different purposes. The same is so with plants. Soybeans, peas, wheat, chickpea, fava bean, they all create different types of textures. And so is the same in the fungal world. When it comes to fungi, different species of mycelium have different textures, different protein contents, different growth rates, and so on. And so the fact that corn dominates this field right now, it would be as if there was only one plant-based meat company and everything was just made from soy. Nobody used pea protein, nobody used wheat protein, nobody used chickpea protein, and so on. And so what companies like mine at the Better Meat Co. are seeking to do is to explore the vast kingdom of fungi and harness the power of fungi fermentation to create new types of culinary experiences using highly proteinaceous, highly economic strains of mycelium that are very meat-like, so that they don't require all of the downstream processing that plant-based proteins are used to require. So, to make a Beyond Burger, you got to grow a field of peas, harvest the field of peas, know it into a flour. The flour is very low in protein, so you got to strip out the fiber, strip out the fat, concentrate it down into a pea protein. Now it's highly proteinaceous, but it's not textured like animal meat, so you have to extrude it, which is a fancy way of saying high pressure, high heat to change the molecular structure of the protein. Then you got to add like 15 other ingredients to it, and you get a Beyond Burger. And so that's the reason why, even though peas are cheaper than beef, a Beyond Burger is much more expensive than beef, because it's not made out of only peas. It has a tiny fraction of the pea plus lots of other processes and other ingredients. What we are seeking to do is to prove that you can create even better alternative meat experiences with a single ingredient that is a whole food that has virtually no downstream processing whatsoever and has an even better nutritional profile. That's what we're pioneering at the Better Meat Co.
Thank you, Paul. Tom, all of this requires money. And so and your background's also quite interesting, from a mix of product development and Microsoft, Yahoo, everything.
Oh, yeah.
And now you're focusing on funding these types of companies. So maybe, can you tell us more about At One Ventures and
I'm trying to connect the dots on a couple of different things. So I invested in Upside Foods, was an 8-person team.
Great.
So that went okay. But what I learned from them is that if you're trying to go after the very lowest cost per kilogram meats, then the cost down curve is an asymptote. So you end up crossing during the flat part of the asymptote, right? You get the fast wins early, and then you get the rest of the wins real slow. And that's why their date is 2030, not because this is like a nuclear fusion type project. Having learned that from Upside, I was like, we need to go after way higher cost per kilogram meats. They're going to become economically saleable way sooner. And finless is actually already cheaper than retail. So I'm going to say first in the world, cheaper than retail, substantially cheaper than retail. You might be having, cellular agriculture, bluefin tuna as the very first economically scalable cellular ag meat in the world. So nice stuff. Connecting a couple things. So what you're saying before, absolutely true. We not just deforested, we kind of ruined a huge number of ecosystems in order to go make our food system, and all the waterways. And most of the land on the planet that we have used for agriculture is for meat production, for protein production. And we're on a trajectory, given the rising populations and the increasing intensity of meat in people's diets, to at least double it, might be triple or more. And right now we're using 50% of the habitable land on the planet to go grow our food. So you can't triple that, right? There's actually not enough room on the planet. In addition to that, as kind of climate destabilization plays through, it's going to be places that had been arable and stable are going to stop being so. You're going to have flash events that basically ruin entire crops in a season. And it means that we're going to want to have more control over our food system. So when you combine the desire to go and grow your food on less land, have more control on it, then things like cellular and fungi and fermentation-based production all become incredibly interesting, because you can site them close to populations. They take very little physical space to go do. And coming down to the core physics of it, when you get a calorie of meat from a cow, you needed to feed it there was about 23 calories of input, including the food and energy used to raise that cow, for you to get 1 calorie of beef. When you do it through cellular agriculture, it only takes 3 calories of input to get 1 calorie of food out of it. Now that said, it's real expensive right now, because we need to figure out how to replace everything in a cow, basically, like the circulatory system, the waste removal system, all the stuff that makes it so that these cells can grow. Like, because we're taking away the respiratory system, the digestive system, all these things that are in the cow, which is fantastic because it's actually respiratory and digestive where is the vector for most diseases, right? Because diseases need to spread, so they typically spread by coughing on each other or like being near poo and all that kind of thing. So when you remove that from the system, you actually eliminate the possibility of the disease vector. So fantastic, but it means that you need to figure out how to rebuild all that stuff. Like how do you basically provide the function of the digestive system, of the circulatory system to these cells. And that's why it's so expensive so far. But if you go after the high kilogram ones, then we're already kind of in that regime. And as we get more wins, then we will figure out how to do the very cheapest meats in addition. There's a lot more to say, but I think this is only the first question. There's all these things you're supposed to do. So let's get into it.
Yeah, so then that moves us into that next aspect. And I know at Jolter, this is always a focus for us, scaling and expanding. So for us, we've had to go to 3 continents and manufacture in different CMOs to achieve scale. And cost and scale are heavily linked. So Brendan, maybe you can start since you're in that scaling piloting stage. It's a critical step. What needs to happen for you to scale your technology, and how is your organization supporting to achieve that?
Yeah, scaling is definitely a critical, question and challenge for the company in this industry. And like Tom just mentioned, completely agree. That's the reason why Finland's food picked the highest price margin species and had the most impact on the environment to start with, which is Pacific bluefin tuna. So you have this like a spread of profit margin allow us to work on the cost. So now the reason why the scaling is still so expensive is just the current infrastructure, the current supplier, the media component that go into the grow all the cells are still expensive. And currently suppliers come around try to produce ingredients that are a lot less expensive. Current R&D scale still utilizing a lot of the very pure pharma grade media components, and those is being manufactured to the purity that for pharmaceutical uses. So you can imagine that cost of those production processes is so high. Now there have been a lot of the suppliers, specifically media suppliers, come around, try to get into this industry by essentially scale back paperwork, documentation that is required for pharmaceutical development, but not required for food-grade media component. That would cut down the cost dramatically. And the second emphasis they're trying to work on is try to scale back the purity. For example, the extract of a nutrients or certain sort of plant-based ingredient will be sufficient rather than to 100% or 99.9% purity, right? That require lots of the filtration, purification process. So for this industry to scale, those suppliers, those supporting infrastructure need to happen, and it is happening simultaneously. For Finland's food, we just based in Emeryville, which is across the bay. We have a pilot facility that can accommodate up to a 1,000 liter bioreactor. But so far, we are going through a regulatory process, so we can just use the benchtop scale to produce enough quantity to do all the safety analysis to fulfill the requirement for the regulatory agencies at the moment. But at the same time, for the next phase, we're definitely looking for the location and site that will support our next production facility. And for that, we're looking into the facility that is not as dramatic as some would imagine, because Finland's food is always try to design the facility is regional, so we can serve the fresh product to the regional consumers. And with that in mind, we don't envision we're gonna be manufacturing or requiring huge bioreactor like 100,000 liters, but we leverage existing technology and put our R&D focus on bring down the cost for that purpose.
Great, and I guess towards Kara and yourself also, one of the things that was always interesting to me in this space was when we launched our first product, the first customers bought it and it cost more than gold per kilogram. And I thought that was amazing. But then when I looked at the cost for some of these growth factors and other additives, it was millions of dollars per kilogram easily. But yeah, so I know, Carrie, you were saying that the focus is from the bench to scale. And so how are you seeing and how are you impacting that?
My favorite tagline right now is bench to scale. So from an academic institution, you know, we're doing a lot of that fundamental research. Most of these companies started in 2015, and and a lot of the companies like to wax poetic about how it was, you know, this idea, and they shared a lot of ideas. But now, as you get closer to commercialization, that open access information has kind of closed down into IP and, you know, intellectual property. And so an academic institution is really key to build that foundational knowledge. And I mean, bottlenecks to scaling, it's like almost anything else in manufacturing. You have fundamental research and you have workforce. And right now, workforce, if anybody is from California, knows that workforce is really, really tight. So, so that's what an academic institution will do. Before I came back to the Cultivated Meat Consortium, I was chief of staff for a Singaporean precision fermentation company, Turtle Tree, and workforce was a huge issue, but contract manufacturing. So most of these new food innovation companies are going to contract manufacturers, and there are not enough contract manufacturing facilities globally. I mean, there's just, everybody's screaming for contract manufacturing. And one company will work all, I mean, you were talking about how you're working in 3 different countries. And so they will work all across the US and then in foreign, and then international companies to try and do your contract manufacturing. And tech transfer to go from one facility to the other is extremely technical and difficult and time consuming. And then you have to preserve your space and hope that, you know, your work at one facility doesn't, you know, blow up because you had a contamination and push you out in terms of time scales. So one of the things that we're really trying to work on at the university is bring all these groups together that can develop facilities that we can go from bench to scale. So you can do your basic research, like, you know, is this cell line gonna work? Is this media component gonna work? Is this gonna work at a small scale? And then work with the local region to get out of that valley of death, which is that common, getting it out of the incubator space, but before you're scaling to a certain size, you know, that 1,000 liter size, that 5,000 liter size. And then if you can prove that, can you scale up to a 25,000 liter size? And then can we go beyond the 25,000 liter size? Some of the largest cell culture fermentation facilities are the Genentech facility out in Vacaville, and that's 25,000 liters. But as we're looking at meat production, we're probably looking at needing to scale 10 times that, you know, 250,000 liter. And to give you an idea of what that looks like, we've talked about that. If you ever go down to Gallo in the Central Valley, they have 1 million gallon fermenters, and you literally have to take a staircase to go around and around and around and around to get to the top, and they have a beautiful view of the valley. You're talking about fermenters that are just absolutely massive. So, and we can talk about funding for those types of infrastructure. But that's what we're hoping to do here, is pull that hub of facilities. You know, there are probably about 140 of these alternative protein companies, and 80% of them are in the state of California. And a majority of them are here in the Bay Area alone. So there really is no better location regionally for a lot of this fundamental ground structure to happen. And it's extremely competitive. You know, the UK was just announcing how they're working with their space program. And, you know, China has put in a mission into their 2030 policy to add cellular ag into their fundamental governmental funding structure. Singapore has their 30 by 30 movement. You know, a lot of this work is being done in countries that can't do traditional agriculture. 90% of the food and water in Singapore comes outside, is imported in. Israel, the Middle East are doing a huge amount in cell ag and are these hubs for this. There are places where you can't do traditional agriculture, and if procurement or food security becomes a real issue, that these are these hotbeds of this research. And to be honest, the US is just a little bit behind. We need to catch up. So, but anyway, that's where we're working on here, is an academic institution can be neutral ground to pull all of these different players into the region.
Definitely, yeah, and I've talked to lots of government organizations, stuff like that, and yeah, the US sadly is behind, even though it has the cheapest sugar. If you're using sugar as a source, it actually would be the best place to.
Glucose, gotta feed those cells, gotta feed those cells.
But Paul, like we were talking earlier, and maybe you're more in the expand stage, so maybe just like how are you tackling that?
Sure. Well, first of all, I couldn't agree more the U.S. is behind. I say that sadly, not jubilantly. I think we should be a leader in this. I have solar panels on my roof, and they were built in Asia. If we're using wind turbines, they're probably built in Asia. Like why let the same happen in food as well? Because this is the future of food. So I totally agree. I think the U.S. should be a leader. We are not currently a leader, but we should be, with lots of leaders. Okay, so first, I will just want to clarify one point earlier that I said, because Tom and I appeared to be disagreeing about about nuclear fusion and cultivated meat. Commonwealth Fusion, which is the most well-funded of those companies, and Upside Foods, the most well-funded, they each say that they plan to be really commercialized by 2030. Commonwealth says they're going to feed into the grid by 2030. Upside says they're going to be on their first supermarket shelf by 2030. That's really what I'm referring to. When will they start making a dent in the problem? Not that it's technologically as difficult to do cultivated meat as it is to do nuclear fusion by any means. So I don't think that we disagree as much as it may have appeared, I think. Now, with regard to scale, it's a lot easier to grow fungi in bioreactors than it is to grow animal cells. There is no place on Earth that grows animal cells in the quantities that are needed to actually make a dent in the problem right now. Whereas corn, as I mentioned earlier in the UK, which is growing fungal cells, it is nearly 1 million liters of capacity that they've been running commercially for decades, and they're not selling at a loss. They sell. In fact, when I was in London, I went to KFC, and I was amazed to see on the menu that Corn's chicken patty was being sold at KFC at price parity with the conventional chicken patty. So it's like, we always think, oh, the price parity is the holy grail in the field. And it's like, it's not only at price parity, it's price parity at KFC. It's not, you don't have to go to like some special store to get it. And so the point is that it's not because they are geniuses, although they are extremely smart and very advanced there. The point is that growing fungal cells is just a lot easier than growing animal cells for a variety of reasons that are kind of irrelevant to this. But for scaling purposes, you can see how companies that want to scale fungi protein fermentation have an easier time doing it than those who want to scale like mammalian cell fermentation or avian or piscine.
Porcine?
I was going to say piscine for fish.
Oh, piscine, okay.
Yeah, I think that's right. Thank you.
Fish is easier, but
Yeah, I am aware of that. So anyway, the point is that at Better Meat Co., despite the fact that, we have dramatically less funding than, what would be thought of for this, we're already running a 9,000 liter reactor that we've been running for 2 years. We sell everything that we produce. We sell it profitably. And it's something that, for a while, we were the second largest mycelium fermentation facility on Earth. Not that 9,000 is, really commercial scale, because it isn't, but it is a lot for a small startup that only has 24 people like what we have. But we can't make a business out of a 9,000 liter fermentation system. It's really a demonstration scale facility for us. And so originally our goal was the same as many others, which was raise a ton of venture capital, go CapEx heavy, spend, $100 million to build your own plant and produce from there, and hope that you have an IRR where you can pay this thing back within less than 5 years. But the funding climate shifted. Beyond Meat stock and Oatly's stock, they both fell by over 90%. In fact, Oatly's probably, I don't know, I would guess over 95% even. Those combined with other negative headlines surrounding the alternative meat space have led to what was 2 years ago a feast period for startups in the space to now a famine period. It's much harder to raise capital, and valuations are much lower. And even though it's counterproductive in my shoes to say this, I think justifiably so. I think a lot of these companies were dramatically overvalued.
even though I say that as somebody who wishes the valuations are back up. All that said, it's much harder now to fund your own facility. There's very little appetite among the venture capital community for these large CapEx projects. And in fact, what you see is the big players who have their own facilities shedding them. So Oatly is getting rid of a lot of their manufacturing. They're going to contract manufacturing, just like what Nick was referring to with his company, Geltor. And Oatly isn't the only one. Tons of the big companies in this space are shedding their own manufacturing because they don't want to be in the manufacturing business. They want to be in the R&D business, basically, where they create the products, hand it off to a manufacturer, and then do it. And so our initial plan at the Better Meat Co. was to build our own greenfield facility, which would be everything that we've dreamt of. Now we're really looking for partners who have existing infrastructure that we can plug into. Nobody's going to have exactly what you need. You're still going to have to spend millions of dollars in order to put your own downstream process in and so on. But you are going to have to find ways to go asset light, where you don't own the means of production. And so now I find myself traveling all over the world looking at various fermentation facilities or even just industrial facilities to see what assets they may have, boilers, chillers, air compressors, wastewater treatment, and so on, even if they don't have fermentation, but that we could plug into, and so we could cut down on the CapEx needed. So that's our goal right now, is to scale up in a much more asset-light way. And the companies that have spent really heavily because the capital was there to do so, I think many of them are also thinking, I know many of them are also thinking about this. Is that really the best thing to do? Some projects have been halted literally mid-project, where they're in like an FEL2 or even an FEL3 with their engineering firms. And these companies just don't see a future in which they can spend enormous capital on these facilities. So that means that if you have existing fermentation assets, you could have a great business, because there's a lot of companies like ours, I presume at Finless, but I know at Geltor and like the Better Meat Co. who want to use them.
Definitely, yeah. And it's not cheap to build. And right now, I guess, Tom, kind of connecting this question and the next question about funding, how do you view investing in companies at this kind of, most of the companies in the space are either early or they're in the teenager kind of stage of a company where you're in this, I need the scale, I don't have the scale, but managing the investor expectations, how do you view that?
Yeah, the reason that the first push was so expensive, it's like metaphorically like if farmers didn't need to just grow the crop, they also needed to like figure out how to make tractors and like build all the roads for their farm and like build all the trucks that take all the stuff away from their farm. Like that's why it was so expensive, right? If you're just trying to learn how to grow corn, you figure out how to grow corn. But like when you need to build all this other, business and operational infrastructure around it, then CapEx, piles up pretty quickly. So I think, similar to, the last comment, I think it's great actually that there's kind of this reset moment where people need to be more real, because then there is the natural sorting out of which part of this is supposed to be infrastructure and which part of this is supposed to be product, right? And work like the work at Davis is really powerful because they're kind of experimenting with how the infrastructure should be put together to be able to kind of signal to the rest of industry, hey, if you want to have a bunch of folks that are using your roads, using your tractors, using your whatever, in this case, your reactor, your bioreactor and engineering and all that kind of setup, then yeah, this is the place that you can go. This is how you can build it, right? So that's an important kind of sorting that's happened. Relative to the position of any specific company that is trying to go asset light, and we kind of have like this little shell model relative to how much actually needs to be inside, owned by you. So a lot of people like raise a lot of money and they kind of go soup to nuts on a greenfield facility, right? But actually most envelopes for buildings are kind of fine, right? So at the envelope level, there's many envelopes that would suit the need. And you typically don't need to build the envelope. Don't become a bricklayer, that's ridiculous, right? Like many places, many buildings you can put your stuff in. Then the shell within the envelope is the MEP layer, which for those that are not familiar stands for mechanical, electrical, plumbing. And this has to do with like how like water, electricity, and air move through the building, including ventilation. And a lot of times you can go find a building with the appropriate enclosure and appropriate MEP. And you're a lot of the way through in terms of reducing the CapEx spend. And then the last shell is the core, which is typically the thing that the company's done the most innovation on. Oftentimes that needs to be owned by the company. Sometimes with the contract manufacturer, you can kind of either move some, production jigs, or you can inform them how to ramp up some of their own equipment to get into that space. But, for companies that need to become more asset light, we just kind of work them through that set of logic in order to figure out what's the right point. Because there's the extremes of greenfield owned and operated and completely outsourced, to co-manufacturing or, contract manufacturing. But there's these kind of gradated, areas in between where you might be able to capture a bit more of the value stack and be able to protect your secret sauce and be more asset light. So that's how you do it.
Great. And in terms of funding and partnerships, I'm kind of curious also, Kara, like from the public perspective,
I think
how are you looking at it?
So like I was saying, we were the first to receive federal, and that focused on our research, but we were also the first to receive state funding. So a bond measure went into the UC system that was approved by Gavin Newsom for $5 million, which is just, a literal, not even a drop in the bucket, like $1 billion
Found in its
budget.
back pocket, right?
Exactly. It's like pocket lint. In terms of funding for research, that went to 3 institutions. That went to UC Davis, that went to UC Berkeley, and that went to UCLA. So UC Berkeley has an alt meat lab where they're teaching masters and undergraduate students how to build product. They're plant-based products. And then there are probably about, I think, 2 or 3 researchers down in UCLA that have been working on cell-based meat research. And then there's 20 of us, 20 faculty members at UC Davis, and they split it equally. So, so that went into the budget. But to be honest, when you talk about 20 researchers, $1.67 million over 3 years, that's enough to fund half a graduate student researcher and me on soft money for 2 years. So it's a real drop in the bucket in terms of funding. There are other plans to put additional bond measures out for more research support. I think the last I heard was the potential for $20 million for research split between those 3 institutions again, and then an additional $50 million for pilot facilities at UC Davis to actually show how to process and build product. And then there are BioMade grants. BioMade is a nonprofit organization with the Department of Defense that's working on biomanufacturing, bioindustrial manufacturing that doesn't have to do with well, anyway, I'm not positive, but it doesn't, food security is a portion of that. And so then there are a lot of other grants. That's what an academic institution does, is we chase grant funding in hopes to stay alive the next year. And so personally, I strongly feel that just like solar, just like EV, just like chips, just like any of these fundamental innovations that changed our existence as a human society, that it's going to need government support to get these done, because it's the long game. It's not the short game. And we're going to need government support to build the cellular ag revolution, because venture capital, and at least my experience being in, Turtle Tree was my 3rd biotech startup, is that funding and investing wants to invest in teams, and they want to invest in platform technologies. They don't necessarily want to invest in CapEx. And in today's funding, I think it's down 80+% in terms of funding for food innovation. CapEx is really, really low on the list. And so we really do need government support to build bioindustrial manufacturing facilities, the whole infrastructure, the whole enchilada. So from the greenfield or retrofitting existing facilities, and that's just going to be really key to get this off the ground.
Great. Brendan and Paul, do you guys have any comments in terms of on the fundraising environment? Geltor, I know we're going for our own fundraising. I know most of us are. I don't think in the last few years people have stopped fundraising. But yeah, it definitely tap of money was turned off. It's starting to get turned on again, in my opinion, but yeah. that was,
Is it? Good.
but how was
Yeah, I'll take a first step. And like Tom said, we're very appreciative of Tom G at Ad1 to lead our Series A first. Now we're going to a Series C. We'll try to scale up. And like Carol just mentioned, that venture capital funding towards manufacturing facility construction is very expensive because the return on investment, the timeline just don't always match up, right? So government funding extremely important to actually foster much better, healthier environment for this industry. And I would like to kind of bring up one example. If there's any delegates from Singapore, please raise your hand. I want to speak on your behalf. This is what I understand, and Kara mentioned that Singapore had this vision, 30% of the food will be produced within Singapore by 2030, right? So with that in mind, they formed the partnership between government and private sector. And this program specifically called A-Start is coordinating all the effort for this industry. And they do have partnership with CMO from biopharma space, try to purposely, not fit, but scale back their facility for cellular agriculture. So they don't have to fulfill all this like air exchange, requirement as high as pharma grade, as well as some of their facility, they were able to kind of build just for purpose rather than for all the pharmaceutical application. And with that, they also formed another program, so that more private funding, they call NURASA, almost like an incubator space, like Carl was saying that UC Davis might have one in the process of building one that encourage all the company to coexist, doing their R&D innovation, produce their product from the pilot facility. So government encouragement, government funding and resources is so important for the company like Finland's Food from Series A and B all the way to Series C to bridge that gap. And I would like to encourage that all the delegates from different regions see this as a sort of a national security, not just the food security, right? And I would believe that we all provide different solutions to consumers and to address all the different issues that impact our environment, not just the ocean, but the land, the air, everything. So that's kind of my perspective. And like to discuss more in terms of the funding, and the current funding environment definitely is not as easy, but I think Paul can probably shed more light on that.
I agree with everything that you said, Brandon, and I certainly agree it's a national security issue, not just a food security issue, and food security is national security. Humanity needs to wean itself off of fossil fuels, and we also have to wean ourselves off of factory farms. There is just no pathway to succeeding as a species by raising billions more animals for food. And so the countries that invest in this are going to be the countries that win. And as I mentioned earlier, we've seen Asia is investing heavily, countries like China and Singapore. Kara mentioned Israel, which is also a world leader in this particular field as well. And the US is right now very busy funding animal agriculture. Kara mentioned a $5 million grant in cultivated meat. I mean, the Biden administration just recently announced $500 million just to expand the nation's slaughter capacity. These are not loans, they're grants. So, you're talking about just continually investing in the ability to slaughter more and more animals, which is exactly the wrong thing to be doing. And so the Better Meat Co. would love to build here in America, but we are very agnostic as to where we build. If we built in Singapore, or if we built in Korea or Thailand or Vietnam or China, we are willing to go anywhere where the incentives are right for us to go produce our product. I wish as an American it would be in America, maybe it will be, but we're open to finding that path to go wherever we need to. And when you look at the fact that meat demand is rising fastest in Asia right now, of anywhere else on the planet, maybe it's more logical to do what we're doing in Asia rather than here. Meat demand is sky high in the United States. The Chinese per capita meat demand is only about half per person what it is in America, but it's quadrupled in the last 40 years, and it's going only higher and higher. Meat demand is rising in all the places where it's going to matter the most in the future. China, India, Brazil, Mexico, all the places where matter the most for the future, you're going to see big increases in demand for meat, because when people escape poverty and they enter the middle class, one of the very first things they do is eat more meat. Obviously, we want people to escape poverty. Needless to say, that is something inherently good that we want, but we need to find ways to allow people to enter the middle class and lead the semblance of a lifestyle like those of us on this boat are accustomed to leading, without having the heavy footprint that Americans and other Western industrialized people tend to have. And a key way to do that is this. And so I agree there needs to be government funding, but I also think that there's also a very strong case for investor funding of this. No, not at the valuations of 2021, but if I were an investor, I would be looking very hard at the cultivated meat companies and thinking, which ones should I be investing in? Even if it is going to be years before they're on the market, I still think it's a good investment. Just like I think I'd be investing in plant-based meat as well, because there's lots of innovations left to be had there. This is a nascent field. It's a truly nascent field. Yes, we've had plant-based meat for literally over 1,000 years, but you didn't have any really meaningful innovations until like the past 15 years. Some people would argue the last 5 with Beyond and Impossible. I would go back further, and I'd say Gardein actually was the big innovator in 2010. But either way, it's like a blink of an eye ago that we started having real innovation in this space. And so I think there's a lot of companies that are going to be winners in the space that have not even been born yet, and that are ripe for investment, whether from venture capital or from governments.
Great. I think we're running out of time, so maybe we might have enough time for one question or 2 questions. But I saw the first hand go up there, so yeah.
I know I really appreciate the panel. I mean, a lot of bright, basically innovations that are trying to do the breakthrough. I want to bring you from, 50,000 feet to maybe 10,000 feet. In US today, right, we are wasting 40% of our food. And that is today's price, not the cultivated, right? Cultivated meat. It's about $400 billion. So I'm raising this question. I want to hear you guys' feedback, because it's also partly selfish, because my company, MetaFoodX, what actually doing is we use an AI approach, introduce a sensor, food sensor, and AI-based predictive production. So for any cafeteria situation, think about tracking per menu item, per portion consumption, right? 24/7, and then use this data to do the production planning, to just cut the overproduction. To me, I think given the urgency, right, we need to do this. But I think today, we still do not have a good appreciation of that. If we can do it, I know the work we do here, I mean, we still continue to help because we don't waste food. So I want to hear you guys' kind of perspective. Is it worth doing? How, you observe the whole society viewing this priority? Thank you.
Thanks.
I think you're absolutely right. I didn't hear the name of your company. What was it? MetaFoodX. So my hat's off to you for what you're doing. I think it's extremely admirable. Wasting food is a major problem for the planet. Just think about, there's over 1 billion animals in the US who are raised on factory farms and never even eaten. And so I want to stress what Tom said earlier, which is in addition to the food that gets wasted, that it's produced and never eaten, there also is massive food waste in raising animals because of what Tom said, that you're feeding, in that case of beef, 23 calories in for 1 calorie out. That is food waste too. Now, what you're doing and trying to finish off food waste at the end of that process, I think is extremely critical. I don't have a lot of policy prescriptions on it, except for one that I'll mention, which is a really cool thing that they've shown at cafeterias, where a lot of food waste happens, because people, if you're a student, you go into the cafeteria, you can get as much on your tray as you want, basically, and you're paying the same amount no matter what you take. So you take a lot of food. And so what they've proven at cafeterias is that students waste dramatically less, not like 5%, but like 20 or so % less if you just take away the tray. Just let them only get what they can carry. and just make them carry it. That's it. Yeah. That's literally it. And there's like dramatically less food waste. And so that type of choice architecture could have a really big impact. And so that's not going to work obviously everywhere, but in places that are cafeteria style dining, that can be a big difference. And so I like to say, places, these universities, they all seem to be doing meatless Mondays these days. Why not trayless Tuesdays and just do like tray-free dining and just get rid of the tray?
That actually makes a lot of sense. I mean, the UC system, UC Davis alone, serves 30,000 meals a day during the academic year, and we feed 97% of the freshman population because they're required to be on campus. So, and they choose not based on cost, they choose based on what's in front of them, and they're, 18. So, but, UC Davis does a huge amount on sustainability. I mean, part of our work is to be looking at side streams. We have a ton of researchers that are looking at agricultural waste, because there's a certain percentage that comes right out of the field and then after processing. So looking at ways to upcycle a lot of those side streams. So personally, I don't think there's a silver bullet to the issue of needing more food by 2050 to feed 10 billion people. It's diversification. It's always going to be diversification.
Thank you to the panelists. I had a question about integrating what you guys do with more traditional agriculture systems. So all of the types of food we've been talking about are patentable, right? So people can make a lot of money if successful off of these types of things. Could you talk about where your type of food production sits with more traditional agriculture systems that maybe don't have the financial incentives that the type of production you guys are talking about has? And how in the future maybe you could integrate those better? Touch on that a little bit.
I know my research lead, who works closely with me, believes that this is an added opportunity for farmers. I debate a little bit with that, but he does believe, there's ups and downs with traditional agriculture. My previous work and his previous work, his current work is in viticulture and enology, so wine industry. We do everything in about 3-month period, right? So you have a lot of ups and downs, but with cellular ag, you're very consistent throughout the year. So there's the opportunity that when you have these ups and downs and you're subject to climate change and vagaries of agriculture, that you could stabilize your system by investing in other routes. And like we were saying, it's not just producing in, cultivated cells and huge vats, but all the side streams that go in there. You're talking about fermenters that are only used 3 months of the year. You're talking about growth media that uses a lot of the same traditional products that are used for feeding livestock. So grain, sugar, amino acids. There are a lot of opportunities, and then they use the same distribution channels. So, not talking about rebuilding the distribution channels. So there are a lot of possibilities. We haven't discovered them all yet. So.
Yeah. And one thing I would add, recently I had a conversation with an investor from New Zealand, and first, change will be slow and progressive. It's not going to be like a light switch. And in there, they're looking at basically offsetting their sheep industry, and they have some of the largest infrastructure built for spray drying, things like that. And they're looking how they can shift their agricultural to also grow feedstocks that can help support fermentation, and then still use all the infrastructure they've built for all the spray drying and development of the molecules. And so there's this kind of stepwise thing that's probably going to happen versus suddenly all the cow farmers are nobody's buying their cows.
That's never going to happen.
And so, yeah.
Sorry, Paul, that's not going to happen.
I appreciate your question a lot because I sympathize with the point that you're trying to make. I will point out patents expire. So they expire in less than 20 years. In fact, many of corn's patents have already expired. So if you want to go do it. But I will say, if people were willing to eat just more traditional plant-based foods, none of this would be necessary. We wouldn't have to do all this biotechnology. We're doing this because we believe that people really want that meat experience. But I will say, if you look at, let's say, Impossible Foods, which in my view is the most meat-like of the alternatives that are widely available today. If you look at Impossible it's at Burger King, it's in every Burger King in America. And according to news reports, the best-selling stores are about 2% of the burger sales are the Impossible Whopper. 2% is pretty good. But that's still like 98% people buying beef, right? And so then you think, well, what could we do that could achieve more than 2% replacement with the current products, right? And there's nothing with plant-based meat that's ever come close. And yet in the New York Times, they just had a story about the New York City public hospital system, where for inpatients, they just changed the choice architecture, kind of like trayless dining. They changed the choice architecture so that all inpatients by default get served a traditional plant-based meal. So it's not plant-based meat, it's not anything biotechy, it's just a plant-based meal, like rice and beans burrito or something like that. And just by changing it, people can ask for meat. If they want meat, they can get it. But just by changing the architecture of the choice so that it's the default, they report 90% replacement. 90, not 2%, but 90% replacement with no biotechnology whatsoever. Now, of course, that's a very controlled environment where you have these inpatients who are literally like strapped into a bed, but still, it's an example of where more traditional solutions to this problem that we are trying to solve seem to actually be more effective than what some of the things that we're doing are.
Yeah. So we're out of time. I know there's more questions, so I encourage people to come probably. I'm assuming there will be a chance for people to chat, but yeah, we're out of time officially, but thank you for the great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Our next session will resume in about 15 minutes. Please feel free to join us in the reception area. That final session, reducing the carbon emissions from air travel. Thank you.